Well, good morning, grandchildren. This is your grandpa reading the story for you, The Cricket in Times Square. And we're ready for chapter 13. If you remember the end of chapter 12, Mr. Smedley was quite taken with Chester the Cricket's musical ability. And he wrote a letter to the New York Times to express his appreciation of what this cricket was able to do and the new music phenomenon that had happened in New York City. And so we pick up our story with that, ready for chapter 13 in our storybook. The music editor of the New York Times was quite surprised to get Mr. Smedley's letter, but he believed in the freedom of the press and had it printed on the theatrical and musical pages of the paper. The next morning, thousands of people at home, over the breakfast table, and in the buses and the trains coming into New York City read about Chester. Well, the Bellinis got to the newsstand very early, and Papa opened the Times bundle and thumbed through a copy looking for the letter. When he found it, he read it out loud to Mama and Mario. Then he folded the paper and put it back on the rack so that he could sell it. "So," said Papa, "we have a celebrity in our midst." The celebrity was just at that moment having himself a yawn in the cricket cage. He had been up most of the night with his manager and Harry the cat, learning new pieces. After eating his breakfast and having another stretch, he tested his wings against each other, like a violinist making sure that his violin was in tune. The wings were fine. This time of year, they almost always itched to chirp. Chester ran over the scales a few times and started to play. His first selection was something he had heard the night before called A Little Night Music. It was by a man named Mozart. Chester and Tucker and Harry had all been delighted by A Little Night Music. They thought it was a very good piece for the cricket to learn because they had heard it first at night, and also because Chester was quite a little person himself. It was a lovely music, too, with little tunes that sounded kind of like insects hopping around and having a grand old time. And as Chester played, the station began to fill up with the usual commuters going back and forth. People collected around the newsstands, some drawn by the chirping, and some just because, well, they wanted to see this cricket that they'd read about in the New York Times. And as always in New York, when a little crowd forms, more people come just to see what the other people are looking at. Well, bees do that. So do human beings. And somebody asked, "Well, who's playing?" "A cricket," a man answered. "Oh, stop joking," the first man said. He burst out laughing. In front of him, a little lady with a feather in her hat, who was enjoying the music, turned around and whispered, "Shh," very angrily. In another part of the station, a man was reading Mr. Smedley's letter, and two other men were also reading it over his shoulders. "My gosh," said the one at the right, "a cricket. A cricket. Who would have believed it?" "It's fake," said the man on the left. "Probably just a record." The man in the middle, who owned the paper, snapped it shut. "It isn't fake," he said. "It's a little living creature, and it sings beautifully, and I'm going to give up my season ticket to the Philharmonic." Everywhere people were talking and arguing and listening to Chester, and Mario made a pile of old magazines and put the cricket cage up on top of them so everyone could see a little bit better and hear more clearly. When Chester finished one number, a shout of "More! More!" rang out through the station, and the cricket would catch his breath, have a sip of water, flex his wings, and begin a new selection as fast as he could. Sounds like quite a deal, doesn't it? Then the crowd grew and grew, and Mama Bellini had never seen such a crowd around the newsstand. But she wasn't one to be dazed by good fortune that she missed out on such a chance. Taking a bundle of the Times under one arm, she worked her way around, murmuring softly so that no one was she was not disturbing the music lovers. Read about the cricket. It's in the New York Times. Read about the cricket. People snapped up the papers like candy. And Mama had to keep going back to the newsstand for more loads of papers. And in less than half an hour, the whole stock of the New York Times had all been sold. Here's a picture of Chester the cricket playing on a stack of magazines, and the other people are standing around watching the cricket play. Don't just sit there with your eyes shut, Mama whispered to Papa. Papa Bellini was one of those people who enjoyed listening to music most with their eyes closed. She put a bunch of Musical America into his arms. Try these. It's a good time right now. Papa sighed, but he did as she asked him, and in a little while all the copies of Musical America were gone. It is safe to say that there had never been such an interest in music in the Times Square subway station as there was on that morning. Over in the drain pipe, Tucker Mouse and Harry Cat were listening too, Harry with his eyes closed like Papa Bellini, and there were so many human beings around that they couldn't really see the newsstand anyway, but they could hear Chester chirping away on the other side of all the heads and the legs and the backs, and his clear notes filled the station. "Didn't I tell you?" said Tucker between pieces. "Look at all them. There's a fortune in this, and I wish one was big enough to pass the hat." But Harry only smiled. He was happy right where he was, just sitting, enjoying the music. And the crowd kept growing and kept growing. In that first day alone, there were 783 people late to work because they had stopped to listen to Chester the cricket. During the next few days, other papers besides the New York Times began to run articles on the cricket. Even Musical America sent an editor. He was an assistant editor, but an editor nonetheless, down to the station to hear a recital. And Chester was news on the radio and the television, and all the announcers were talking about the remarkable insect who was delighting the throngs of the people in the Times Square subway station. The Bellinis decided that the best times for Chester to play were early in the morning and late in the afternoon, since that was when the station was the most full. And concerts began at 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m., and usually lasted about an hour and a half, not including encores. Business boomed at the newsstand. Mama made sure that extra loads of magazines and newspapers were delivered, but even so, by closing time, they had sold out completely, and Mama Bellini, by the way, turned out to be the best friend a cricket ever had. At noon, she would rush home and fix Chester some delicacy for lunch, like a midget fruit salad or an entire vegetable dinner so small that you could serve it on a silver dollar. But Chester really preferred the mulberry leaves, but he ate everything so as not to hurt Mrs. Bellini's feelings. Sai Fong, who had seen Chester's picture in the paper, kept Mario supplied with leaves, and he and the Chinese gentleman dug out two collapsible chairs from his attic and came uptown every day at 8 and at 4:30 to hear Chester's new programs. Mr. Smedley was there at least once a day also. He brought a tape recorder and made recordings of all the new pieces that Chester had learned, and during the intermissions, there was always an intermission of 10 minutes halfway through the concert. He delivered short talks on musical appreciation to the audiences. So, by Thursday, Chester Cricket was the most famous musician in all of New York City. But now there was a strange thing. He wasn't really happy. Not the way he used to be. Life didn't seem to have the fun and the freedom that it had before. Now there were responsibilities, new music to learn. For one thing, although he thought the glory was very nice, Chester found that it made you tired to play every day. 2 concerts a day, every day, was an exhausting program, and he wasn't used to playing on schedule. Back home in the meadow, if the sun felt nice, or the moon was full, or if he wanted to have a musical conversation with his friends and the lark, he would chirp because, well, he was in the mood to chirp. But here, he had to begin performing at 8 or at 4:30, whether he felt like it or not. And of course, he was very glad to be helping out the Bellinis, but a lot of the joy was gone from the playing. And he really felt sad. There was something else. Chester didn't like being looked at. It wasn't so bad while he was playing, of course. Everyone was quiet then, enjoying the music. But after the performance was over, the human beings just seemed to crowd around and put their faces right down close to the bars and poke their long bony fingers through, and souvenir hunters, can't get my page turned. Souvenir hunters had taken his paper cup and even the pieces of mulberry leaves that were left over. Chester knew they didn't mean any harm, but he couldn't get used to the idea of millions of eyes just, staring at him. It got so bad that when the concerts were over, he took to crawling into the matchbox and pushing up a piece of Kleenex to block the entrance. Then, on Thursday, 3 things happened that upset him very much. The first was September. It was the first day of the new month. Chester happened to glance up at the top of a copy of the Times where the date was, and there he saw it, September 1st. A new month. A new season, too. Autumn was almost upon them. For some reason, the thought of September with all its changes made Chester feel very small and lost. And that evening, while he was playing a brown leaf, the first leaf of the fall blew into the station and landed right next to the cricket cage. Now this leaf had come from New Jersey. A playful gust of wind had danced it over the Hudson River, up 42nd Street, and whisked it down the subway entrance, and Chester was in the middle of a song when the leaf came down. It was such a shock to see this little reminder of all that was happening. It was happening all over the country. For a moment, he just couldn't continue. But then he realized where he was, and he forced himself to go on, and Mario was the only one who noticed the break in the playing. But the worst thing that happened after the concert was over. Chester was leaning up against the matchbox when suddenly 2 fingers began to work their way through the bars of the cage towards the little silver bell. It wasn't Mama's fingers, or Papa's, or Mario's. Chester knew the hands of the Bellinis. Somebody was trying to steal his bell. The cricket chirped in alarm just as the man was about to pull it down. Papa turned around, saw what was happening, and shouted, "Hey, what are you doing?" The man disappeared in the crowd. Mama and Mario had been outside selling off the last of the day's papers. They came running back to the newsstand. "What is it?" panted Mama. "What's going on?" "A thief," said Papa. "Is my cricket all right?" asked Mario anxiously. "Yes," said Papa. "He's in the matchbox." Mario picked up the box and looked in. There was Chester, piling a Kleenex against the opening. "You can come out now," Mario said. "It's safe." But Chester wouldn't come out. Mario had noticed that the cricket took to hiding after each recital, and it worried him. Mama Bellini was convinced that the man was a kidnapper, or rather a cricket napper, not just a thief. But Papa told him how he had been going straight for the bell. "That bell belongs to my cricket," said Mario. "Mr. Fong gave it to him." He unfastened the bell and put it way back in the cash drawer next to Mama's earring so it wouldn't be tempting anyone else. Chester was still hiding in the matchbox. Mario gently pulled the Kleenex away and whispered, "Please come out." Chester stirred and chirped, but stayed where he was. "What's the matter with you?" said Papa. "Well, I think he might be sick," said Mario. He coaxed Chester with a mulberry leaf. The cricket poked his head out of the matchbox. When he saw that the crowd had broken up, he jumped into the palm of Mario's hand. "You should take him to a bug doctor," said Mama. "What do you call him?" "Entomologist," said Mario, holding the leaf for Chester to nibble. "Take him to an entomologist, then," said Mama. "He might just be tired," said Papa. "We could give him a rest for a few days." Chester had eaten so much of the leaf that he didn't want any more. He gave a short chirp for a thank you and jumped back into the box. "He isn't happy anymore," said Mario. "How do you know?" said Mama. "I can just tell," said Mario. "I know how I'd feel if I was a cricket." Mario put the matchbox in the cricket cage. "Next week school begins," he said. "You gotta promise you'll take good care of him while I'm not here." "Oh, we will, Mario," said Papa. "We will. We like him too, you know." The boy stood looking down at the cage. His forlorn head was drawn together in a worried kind of a frown.